OSECHKIN, the author and creator of the Gulag Units project, is in direct contact with us. Vladimir, hello. Greetings, Vadim, and greetings to dear viewers and subscribers. Airfield, a significant part of Russian strategic aviation has been destroyed. This is a blow to the nuclear triad, which Putin treats with some special feeling. First of all, what do you know about what is happening? Are there any signals, sources? Yes, let's start with that. What is known at the moment? To be honest, not much is known at the moment, because most of our sources have now literally disconnected the connection. There is an escalation, and one of the sources, who is involved in long-range aviation, said that a lot of FSB officers came to the base. Here, in general, many people are out of touch now. Phones are disconnected. A number of objects are just now physically impossible to carry mobile communications, so data from sources will be, I don't know, maybe later in the evening or tomorrow. But now full combat readiness. Accordingly, the maximum number of officers is collected. Will there be an answer? Unfortunately, it will probably be in the very near future, during the day. So, in general, yes. Unfortunately, I say too many words today, unfortunately, but there really aren't enough good things. Obviously, the war is in full swing. This is a real, no special military operation. Escalation. All restrictions on deep strikes have been lifted. And now we see what Ukrainian WAVs are capable of, how deep they can reach and hit, including, as you said, the triad. At least under attack are several airfields based on those aircraft that almost every day in recent years took off and carried out missile and bomb attacks on the territory of Ukraine. The war has come to Russia in full swing. Whether general mobilization will be declared, whether war will be officially declared, or vice versa. Is it all somehow that the wave is rising, and then when the negotiating groups meet, it will come to naught? Let's see. Well, judging by what is happening now, and judging by the panic in the Z propaganda, in the pro-government, pro-power Telegram channels in Russia that link today's events with Pearl Harbor. By the way, I analyzed the content of the Z channels. It seems that most of them are actually on the payroll of the GAR and the SBU. In other words, judging by these panic moods and by what they publish, this is just such a, well, de facto continuation of an informational psychological special operation. Why they escalated, what they want to achieve is not clear, but it is clear that the audience of their channels is shocked. Of course, they did not expect this. They thought that their trains were the best trains, and then, literally and figuratively, we see exactly the opposite. And yes, returning to the topic that we urgently discussed on the trains last night, but it is obvious that this is either a provocation of the FS, or it is, of course, a complete failure of the FS. If you believe the Russian propaganda, which sees the Ukrainian trace in everything that happens in Russia, but then, of course, it is a complete failure of the FS if they admit that they are under their noses. During the dictatorship, when they control everything and everyone, similar events occur. But I think that these things that are happening now will become such a turbocharger to a certain long overdue rotation. In the Russian power unit of switchmen, or the guilty in Russia are very quickly found. They just write here that they compare it with Pearl Harbor, that there may be some kind of answer. There is a question. One of the questions that immediately arises, whether Putin will use nuclear weapons, a nuclear bomb in response. Although, what does the answer mean? In other words, it is always important to point out that he started this war and everything that is happening now, including at airfields, is because he started this war. Literally, yes, Vadim, weapons depots are being detonated in Severomorsk right now. Right now, at this time, there are columns of smoke, fire, explosions are going on. These are nuclear submarines. By the way, this is Severomorsk, this is the base, this is Vedyevo there, right. Are they? Well, there are bases of the submarine fleet. There are arsenals, storages of various products, including nuclear ones. I think that, after all, the blow was not inflicted on the nuclear ones. What is detonating now is that, well, these are missiles, possibly torpedoes. We need to figure it out now while collecting information, rechecking. As you understand, yes, many people now want to look like experts, as if they already know everything to the end. But right now events are developing, and most of the staff of the same bases, they, of course, are not a subscriber now. They are not in touch. And it is clear that they now have a military situation, a shock, they are being attacked. They were sure that they would not be reached, they would not be attacked, but as a result, we see that Vladimir Zelensky flew to Berlin, to Germany for a reason. And it is obvious that there are modern technologies that allow you to hit so deep now. And the most important support from partner countries, allies. It is the escalation of this nuclear potential, because on the one hand, when we started our conversation, we were talking about part of the nuclear triad. It could have been a coincidence in the sense that Russian strategic bombers are shelling Ukraine every day, literally every night, and it was not aimed at them as part of a nuclear triad. But when nuclear submarines appeared in this line, and the base of the Northern Fleet, where nuclear submarines are based, is it can be assumed that this is already an attack on the nuclear triad of the Russian Federation, on the sacred cow of Vladimir Putin, and the Russian Federation in general. It's even in some mental sense. The nuclear triad has been introduced all the time. We have the most powerful nuclear weapons, and so on. How can this be interpreted? I think that now Ukraine is demonstrating its military capabilities, and of course, this is very painful for Putin, and for his inner circle, and for the main directorate of the General Staff, where it is clear that there is no hot pursuit now. But in the coming days a debriefing will begin, and this, of course, is a failure. And in the air defense, and in military intelligence, no one expected this. Everyone measured everything by the same standards that were still there a month ago. The situation has changed. Putin was playing cat and mouse with the West, leading everyone by the nose, but in fact was not going to stop fighting. But they show that Ukraine has teeth, and these bites are very painful. Let's see what happens in the very next few days, whether there will be these negotiations at all, or there will be a cancellation of these negotiations. And if there are negotiations, but it is obvious that the stakes have increased. And the role of the negotiators and the negotiations themselves is now, these days, it is, of course, dramatically increasing. If we return to the risks, strikes on the nuclear triad, we need to double-check the information now, because there are several different military bases and arsenals there. If indeed the strikes were inflicted on the places where the so-called these products, nuclear missiles, are stored, it is quite possible that this will be such a red line for Putin, and his power bloc will expect something more decisive from him in response to Ukraine. I think that the next day or two is probably the most, perhaps the most dangerous, the most difficult days for the entire time of this vile war. But if you do not take into account the first week, here is this unexpected surprise attack in February of the 22nd year. The talks have not yet cancelled, the talks in Istanbul between the Russian-Ukrainian side. In other words, there were reports that Murov, that is, the Minister of Defense of Ukraine, will lead the negotiating group. But here the question arises, how will these negotiations be conducted in the context of escalation? And what can these negotiations lead to in general? Just if you think about it, what are they for? Vadim, of course, the escalation here is not from Ukraine, but from Russia. At any moment, if Putin decides to stop fighting, picks up the phone, calls Washington, Berlin, Paris, and Kiev, and says that he gave the command and the troops are retreating 20 to 30 kilometers back there and will not attack anymore, it is obvious that nothing else will fly in response. And if Putin, on the one hand, is trying to negotiate with one hand and keep Donald Trump skidding, and on the other hand, hundreds of Russian drones and WAGs are hitting Ukraine every day. What to expect from Ukraine? Of course, she defends herself. And as already here, let's rely on what has happened in the last 2 weeks. This trip to Berlin, negotiations with Chancellor Merz, and the position that the Chancellor took, of course, after communication. Coordination, I am sure, with the leadership of Great Britain, with the leadership of France, with the leadership of the United States. Well, it is clear that they show Putin that if he continues to play with fire, then the answer will be appropriate. And if everything goes on like this, then in a matter of weeks, Putin will have no airfields and suitable long-range aircraft. Thank you, Vladimir. I think we'll meet again today because we're going to do special airs at the Grammys. Thank you to Vladimir for going on our air last night and today in such an operational format. So we will wait for news, follow the developments, and continue to work on the air. Thank you and see you soon. Goodbye. Yes, finally I wanted to say that I just wish everyone who watches us in any case, regardless of which country and where they are, a peaceful sky over their heads and a speedy end to this nightmarish war.